You are listening to Survival Stories with Jacqui. Welcome, survival warriors. If you are a victim or survivor of trauma, then you're in the right place. In this show, we'll explore the extreme strength displayed by victims of trauma as they journey through life to the survival pinnacle. My name is Jacqui, and I am so grateful to be here today to share my survival with you. Here is this survival story. Let's dig deep. Trauma is an issue which affects pretty much everybody in the world today. It affects us in different ways, but the consequences remain the same. They get deep-seated as the mind becomes cluttered and are often coupled with low self-esteem as a consequence of the trauma. Today, I am very excited to bring to you a special guest, Dr. Ed. So I'm going to say to you, as always, my name's Jacqui, and this is Survival Stories with Jacqui and Friends. Now, Dr. Ed is a chiropractor, and he's been doing a lot of work lately on how to train the brain to deal with love. How much would we love to know how to deal with love? So without saying more, because I'm very, very excited to hear all about this, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Ed, to introduce himself, and let's hear what he's got to say. We're going to dig deep, folks, so stay tuned. Dr. Ed.
Hi, Jacqui. Thanks for having me on the show here. I really talk to people about the frequency of love. And just to give you a little bit of background on me, I'm a holistic chiropractor by trade. So I started out when I was younger in the chiropractic field and had a lot of different experiences like other people, and was actually in and out of chiropractic for different reasons. And one of them actually had to do with the trauma that I went through with my dad passing when I was younger, but we'll come back to that. But so I have had an interest in how stress affects the body. And when patients come in, many times we'll see them in pain and we think, okay, here's their pain. We have to focus on getting them out of pain. But what I discovered is until you really understand how the mind is affecting the pain, you can't always get to the pain. So you may be able to do some modalities and do some short-term pain relief, but ultimately, if the brain is running certain patterns and certain wiring patterns, then the pain will come back, be recreated through the stress patterns. So as I developed in my career, I was always looking for different techniques and things that I could do to help relieve that. I learned things like EFT and hypnosis and NLP, neurolinguistic programming, all kinds of different things that would be useful to help people along the way break their patterns, break their fears, break their stress. Another one is called BEST, which was developed by Dr. Mortar. And they were all very wonderful, wonderful modalities. And as I was discovering them, I still felt that there was something missing, something more that I wanted to learn about. And recently, within the last year, I really feel like I've found what I was looking for that's helped. And now I'm bringing it back to how we can develop these internal frequencies in our body and our system of what love is. And love is a higher frequency. And some of this comes from the work of Dr. David Hawkins, who wrote a book called Power versus Force, where he talked about the different consciousness levels. And in order to get to love, we have to travel through this ladder of all these other different emotions and consciousness states. And fear is one of them. Fear is very low on the ladder, but it's almost, if you think of a ladder and you think of getting up onto a roof, Jacqui, that feeling of, okay, I got to climb up here, that can invoke some fear in and of itself of just climbing up there and thinking about, I'm going to be up there, I'm going to be vulnerable. So climbing up to a frequency of love can have that feeling for many people too, especially if they've been traumatized, they've had difficult childhood experiences or different trauma things that have happened in their life, similar to what happened to me. So all these things can rewire the brain in a negative way and get people to start bouncing their traumas off each other. And then when we're bouncing our traumas off each other, look at what's happening in the world right now. This is just a big pool of what we've been dealing with individually for a really long time, and that's unresolved trauma.
Would you say that's it? I love that, the way that you've summarized what we're all going through today. But would you say at the bottom of all of that, that you're in a positive place because you're able to understand it at that level?
Oh, for me personally, yes. I mean, I'm able to understand now what I have to do to keep myself in a positive place, to clear out any of these emotions or things that happened. And it's wonderful. I mean, when you know that you have the tools, when you feel empowered, then it changes your life. It changes your life. And then when you operate from that perspective, others can feel it. Others can kind of, latch onto it, or they can follow by example because they see that somebody else can do it. It gives them permission is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I mean, I feel very good, and it's just an internal feeling. It's more of an internal feeling of joy versus trying to search for something outside of myself.
That's good to hear. And I'm so happy to hear another positive person, because the way the media is working at the moment, it's very easy to get lost. But I'm going to ask you to get lost again just for a moment, just to put this all in context for our listeners. Ed, what was your deepest, darkest moment, where you knew, in a point in your life where you knew things had to change and you had to take control of your life and how you deal with things?
Well, I mean, there was the starting point of it goes back to my father's passing. It was very traumatic. I was with him, myself, my ex-wife, and my mother. We were all with him when it happened. And specifically what happened was he was away on business and he hurt his back. And we got a phone call that we needed to go get him. My mom called me at work one night and said, "Hey, Ed, your dad's hurt. He's in Iowa. We were living in Illinois." And she said, "We got to go get him. He's in the hospital. I don't really know what's going on." So we went out to journey out to pick him up. We picked him up from the hospital, and just the normal routines of dealing with a loved one that's not feeling well or in the hospital. We listened to what the nurses said, and we listened to, what the doctors said. And they basically told us, just give him this pain medication. His pain is under control, and they released him. So we took him. We stopped by his hotel. We got all his things cleared out. We stopped by the pharmacy to pick up medication. And looking back now, I remember he was uncomfortable. He was kind of grasping underneath his arm like this. I didn't know why. I thought maybe he was cold. You know how when people are cold, they do this?
Yeah.
So I thought he was cold maybe. And so I remember in hindsight now that he was doing that. And I asked him if he was okay. And he said, "Yeah, I'm just tired." And so then my mom got the prescription filled and we got on the road. I was a little bit tired from driving from Illinois there. So I asked my ex-wife if she could drive him. And she's a good driver over the road. We always joke about that. Like she could have, she can just drive for hours. Anyway, so I decided to just go in the car with my mom and kind of get a little shut eye. And about 30 minutes into the trip, we stopped at a rest stop to get some gas and go to the bathroom. And he seemed to get out of the car okay, and was a little groggy, but he seemed okay. And we all got back in our cars and we started on our journey again. And then about another 20 minutes later, all of a sudden, the flashers came on from the car in front of us that my ex-wife was driving. And She pulled over. This was before cell phones, guys. Now, so we had a little bag, one of those bag cell phones, in the car, and so
they're called weapons now.
I guess, yeah, right. I don't mind weapons. So we didn't have these little boxes that we carried around back then, so we couldn't communicate with each other other than she put the flashers on. So she pulled off into the rest area, and she ran out of the car, and she said, he just passed out. So I went up. I was trained in CPR and emergency, resuscitation, because I was in chiropractic college, but it was very odd. Very odd because he was breathing, but he didn't have a pulse. So anybody that's been trained in CPR knows that, you're supposed to go through your ABCs. And I'm going through my ABCs and I'm really confused. And of course, it's a loved one that I'm going through it with too. So that makes it a little bit harder. Like, why is he breathing, but he's got no pulse? So you're not supposed to do any chest compressions or anything like that as long as they have a pulse or as long as they have a heartbeat. So I didn't. I was waiting. I had some acupuncture needles. I threw some acupuncture needles in him thinking, oh my God, maybe he had a reaction to the drugs. That's what I thought. I thought he had a reaction to the medication that we just picked up. And I remember feeling just so horrible about it because I was the one that encouraged him to take the medication, So eventually the emergency crew came. My mom had called them, and it seemed like hours before they showed up. When you're in a situation like that,
yeah,
time is distorted for sure. So I remember being in the car with him, sitting in the driver's seat, and then the EMT guys came up. I took the acupuncture needles out, and I looked at his eyes, and his eyes were dilated, and I knew what that meant. I guess intellectually or looking back, I could say that I knew what that meant intellectually, but I wasn't processing it at the time. At the time, I just thought maybe he just had passed out or something, or had a heart attack. I thought he had a heart attack.
Sure.
Really thought. So they did what they do. They hooked him up and everything. They eventually put him in the emergency ambulance. I can't even say it. Ambulance. And they put him in the ambulance and took him off to the hospital. We followed along. And when we got there, after about 20 minutes, they came out and they told us that he didn't make it. So you can imagine, we were all in shock. We didn't know what happened. Again, I think we all thought that he had a heart attack. And it turned out later he had what's called an aortic dissection, where the lining, basically, if this is the hole where the artery is, they have layers, and the layers pull apart, and the blood goes in between the different layers, and then basically balloons out the artery and dissects it or creates an aneurysm, and it burst, and it was up at the top of the aortic arch. So there wasn't much chance for survival. The thing that was really sad is they could have caught it in the hospital. And we tried to, go through some different steps to see if the doctors had done what they were supposed to do. And basically they took a history and the history was incorrect. They didn't ask the proper history. They did a straight leg raise on him. And chiropractically or orthopedically, for anybody that knows medicine out there, if you lift up somebody's leg, straight leg raise, and they have pain, you think, oh, that's positive for a disc sign. They have some kind of irritation in the nerve root. So they just figured that's what he had, but if they had done a better job at the history, they would have realized that he had 2 lumbar discs removed in that area. So there was no way he could have had a positive sign for something that wasn't really there.
My gosh.
So
that's a lot to take in, to know that he passed and he didn't have to pass at that time. Really.
Yeah. It's still a problem, Jacqui. I mean, I don't know how it is over there, but even in the States here, we don't have strict rules on our medical facilities as far as how many hours they consecutively work. So when doctors are interning, Sometimes they can work 48 hours straight without any sleep. And we don't let our pilots do that who fly the planes. We let people do that who are caring for bodies. And
I think it's like the nature of the beast of working in, in medics, as a medic. It shouldn't be. Don't get it twisted for a minute that I'm saying that it's exactly right, because my brother is a doctor and my sister works in a hospital as well. I don't think it's right that they should have to work that long, those long hours. But look where it could lead.
But there, at some point I thought part of my healing was supposed to be writing a book about that and really trying to get the message out there about how the system is broken. The truth is there's so many systems that are broken that it's hard to know where to start. And I really just wanted to focus my energy on positive things and my family and, all that kind of stuff instead of going off. And who knows, maybe it's all coming around full circle. Maybe me talking about it now creates some kind of awareness, but I've, over the years, given people advice on what to do if they're in the ER and how to get doctors to listen to them. The main advice that I give is, with all the schooling doctors go through, many times the egos can get in the way, and
Oh yes.
They don't want patients telling them what they were trained to do. So a prime example of this was one time my ex-wife was in the hospital for dizzy spells. And I came in after she was in there, asked if the doctor had seen her, and they said yes, and asked what the doctor did, and they told me, and I asked my ex-wife, I said, did they check your ears? And she said, no. She doesn't think that it's an ear infection. I said, okay. So the doctor came up and I said, oh, hi, I'm Ed, I'm the husband. I didn't tell her I was medically trained. That's another secret too. You
never reveal.
You don't want to get like medical egos like bashing together. So I just asked, what she thought was wrong. And she said, oh, she just has some vertigo going on right now. And I said, well, do you think it can be an ear infection? And she said, no, it's not an ear infection. And I said, okay. So rather than sort of argue with her about that, I just told a story. And I told a story because I learned this from sales, actually. And so I told a story, a third party did, and I said, I'm just asking because a friend of mine had a similar situation where their husband went into the hospital and he had an earache. And then when they looked in, they found out that, or he had dizzy spells. And when they looked in his ear, they found that there was some kind of ear infection or fluid in his ear. I think that's what I said. I think fluid in the ear. And she said, oh, yeah, sometimes that happens. And she said, since we're talking about it, let me just take a look right now. So she looked in the one ear on the right. She didn't see anything. She came over and she looked in the left ear. And then she looked up at me. And then she looked in the left ear again. And she goes, my gosh, there is fluid in her ear.
Oh, my goodness.
Had I not said that, she would have never checked. And if somebody had been in the emergency room, prior maybe to, or even me, like I was thinking, when we went to pick up my dad, I beat myself up for many years for not asking questions or not knowing how to go through what I just explained to you. And if I had maybe shared some kind of story, like, do you think that, but I didn't even know what an aneurysm was. I mean, I knew what an aneurysm was, but I never knew anybody that had an aortic dissection. Since then, there's two Hollywood stars at the same age, died at the same age as my dad did. John Ritter. Did you know who John Ritter was, the Threes Company?
Yes.
Yeah, he died of a dissecting aortic aneurysm at the age of 54.
Wow.
And a gentleman, I forgot the actor's name, who was in The Green Mile, same thing, died at 54, aortic aneurysm.
Wasn't that the tall guy?
The big burly guy in The Green Mile. Yep. Mm-hmm. He his character's name was John Coffey. I do remember that. Yeah. He passed away of dissecting aortic aneurysm too, and so It's very rare, but yet for me, it was interesting that they happened at the same ages. And I just turned 54 this year. So I had to go through a little trauma clearing on that too, because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm at that age. And
I'm sorry, but before I ask my next question, I have to say, I can think of a number of people who would love to look like you at 54. You look great.
oh, thank you. Gosh, you made me blush now.
Were you close to your dad? Were you, real father-son bonding type of close?
I mean, for the most part, he was very philosophical. He was a deep thinker. He was a pretty good blend of big picture thinking, and also he could be very detail oriented too. I don't profess to be anything like that, but my bond with him was because of the philosophy, the deep thinking, I guess I kind of felt like I was his little buddy. Not that we didn't have our things, I went through stuff with him in childhood too, which is probably another story, but it had to do with his entanglement with my mom. And so that's another thing that I've learned about in relationships. So when I talk about relationships, I talk about imago, I talk about that stuff. But for me and my dad, yeah, we had the bond, and then my brother was more like my mom. And so, so when he left, I kind of felt like the odd man out. I felt like I didn't really fit into the family structure at all anymore.
So would it be accurate, correct me if it's not, to say you felt a little bit of guilt for letting your buddy go? You said you were like his little buddy.
Yeah. Well, I certainly felt the guilt that I felt was not about being the little buddy, but about me going to chiropractic school and having medical information, and maybe I should have known what to do, even though the doctors on staff didn't really know what to do. Somehow I beat myself up for not saying the right thing, not knowing what to say. Maybe if I had asked questions, but that was just my mind playing a lot of tricks on me, about what happened in the past and not letting go of the past. And, it happens with survivors a lot of times. I was just listening to an interview yesterday of a woman whose sister passed away when she was younger, her older sister, and she wasn't even there, and she felt the same kind of connection, like she just kept running over and over it in her mind, to the point where she got sick and wound up getting in a wheelchair because her nervous system broke down because of the stress of her not being able to resolve why she wasn't there. Her sister was killed by a drunk driver. And so somehow she felt that, I don't know, that she could have had an influence on that. And our minds do play tricks on that. So that's where it becomes like a protector controller part of our brain that gets activated during the trauma that gets a little bit out of hand. It's supposed to be for well-meaning, but then it starts affecting the rest of the brain and the rest of the mind negatively. And so I certainly went through that. And then my ex-wife and I, because of that, I think, we went through our own trauma patterns and wound up getting divorced.
Before we explore a little further, I'm going to take a break, Ed, because you've given some valuable information there. Thank you.
What does it take to be a healthy human? Well, at the Healthy Human Project, we're all about self-development, helping you find out what it is that's blocking your way. It's kind of like rocks in the road. If you know that there's an obstacle and you know there's a way to get around it, then wouldn't you want to find out about it? Well, as it turns out, most of the obstacles that we have come from programming in our childhood, come from either micro traumas or macro traumas that slow us down in relationships and business and decision-making processes. So what we do at the Healthy Humans Project is we get to the crux of what is going on in a very gentle and simple way. We work with the superconscious mind, and the superconscious mind oversees the conscious mind, oversees what's going on with the subconscious. And knows what all the programs are and knows how to integrate them and restore them. It's kind of like defragging the computer. So come on over to the Healthy Humans Project. You can either go to the Instagram page right now for that, the Healthy Humans Project on Instagram, or you can go to my Facebook group called Healthy Humans on the Go, and we'll show you how to get through these blocks and roadblocks and get to where you want to go.
Right, thank you, Ed. We're back.
Hi.
We've explored your father's passing and your divorce. Where are you going to take us next in your journey?
Where am I going to take you next? Well, the journey was, then a lot of self-discovery, of trials and tribulations, not really handling what happened with the dynamics of the divorce, which I won't get into specifically in this conversation because that could take a whole hour in and of itself. But I'll just say that there were dynamics that were set up that I felt so hurt about that, it led me on a path of just really not feeling really good about my way in the world. And no matter what I tried, it just seemed like nothing was working. I had left my chiropractic career to save my marriage. I thought that didn't work. And then when I was doing super well in sales and things like that, that still seemed like that wasn't good enough. Again, with the certain dynamics that I was in. So I began to just believe that I wasn't enough, that I just, despite knowing that I was a good person, I didn't have this belief where you hear some people say that they hate themselves, or you hear some people say that they don't like themselves. I never really had a sense that I had this concept of myself as being any of that. I felt like I was a spiritual person. I'm empathic by nature, or an empath, where I could feel what others are feeling. So it's pretty easy for me to put myself in other people's shoes. I feel like I would lead with love and just, but I had that nice guy syndrome, that just seemed like I was getting walked on left and right,
Yeah.
So if anything, that was, weighing on me and weighing on the fact that you kind of go, hey, what does it take? You're doing all these things and you're trying to be a good person. And so that's what I see a lot of what's going on out in the world that's creating pain for people, is when they think that they're really trying to do their best and they feel like being a good person, and yet life is still beating them down and they're not getting to where they perceive that they should be, or they're, the bank accounts are low and the struggles are high and the relationships aren't working out. You start to question things. You start to question, why am I here? What good is this doing? What good am I if all this is? You start asking all kinds of questions. And so, my lowest point was I was living in Minnesota, and I was exposed to mold. I lived in a place where after my divorce, I rented a house. In the house, because it was a rental, did not get inspected for mold. I did not know it had mold in it until after I moved in. And I found out because my cats started getting sick in the winter when we put the heat on, and cats don't normally get sick that easily. And then I started getting sick, waking up with covered in redness all over my body, itching in the middle of the night, couldn't sleep, and my hair started falling out. It was like crazy. So I knew something was going on, and one of my friends said, check into some environmental stuff. So sure enough, I did a little test. I actually took a Petri dish, and I put it near an air vent, and the next day it populated mold. And I called a lab company up, and they said, man, if you've got that in there, you got to run from that place because there's a lot of mold in there. So that started my mold journey, and the journey with being exposed to mold when you're genetically sensitive to it is really, really trying. It's it affects your brain, it affects your immune system. But I felt like I had dementia symptoms. I would walk into a store one day and not even know or remember why I got there. Like, why am I here? Just in the middle of a Target store, and completely forgot what I came for. I didn't have any list. I couldn't remember where I parked my car in the parking lot. And, and this was about, 6 years ago now? 6 years ago. So that was really scary. And I had to pack up all my stuff in my apartment house, put it in storage, demold the place, and move out. It was like, you see people wearing all these uniforms right now for the COVID. Like, that's what I had. I had this like white thing on. I had a mask on as I'm moving out of my place. And the only person that I knew that would take a divorced guy in with a cat was a friend that I had up in Minnesota at the time. And she said, hey, I know somebody that could watch your cat, and you can stay here for a little bit. And I didn't know what else to do. I mean, I was divorced. I didn't have a situation with my family at the time where any of them would help me out. So I packed up everything and got in my car, took my cat, and we went to Minnesota. And so that was the beginning of kind of part of a dark journey for me, because I just felt like I got totally displaced. First my dad passes, then I go through a divorce, and now on top of it all, I get exposed to black mold, and I happen to be one of those people that are genetically sensitive to it. So I was asking questions like, what else can go wrong, right?
Yeah.
Which I know now is not a good question to ask. You don't want to ask those questions. I learned about asking, positive affirmations. Noah St. John actually wrote a book about that called Affirmations, where you ask the opposite, like, how can it get any better than this? Or, why are good things happening to me? But at the time when you're in pain, it's a natural pain question to ask. You just feel like the world is clamping down on you.
Yeah.
What else can go wrong? And then, and then the universe will show you what else can go wrong.
Yeah, it says, oh, have you had this yet? Yeah.
So that's how I started to begin an awareness of when you get into that place where negative things are happening and you ask those questions, then look out, because something else negative can come right around the corner. And I thought it was the universe punishing me. I thought somehow all these experiences were happening. I certainly didn't have control of my dad passing away. That wasn't something that was, I thought it was in my control. And I probably was punishing myself internally, but the truth is that's something that was not in my control. I wanted it to be, but it wasn't. The divorce, it takes two people, and when two people are going through trauma patterns, I've told my kids this. I had a conversation with one of my youngest, and I said, listen, it's not mom's fault or dad's fault that there was a divorce. Two people that can't handle their trauma patterns and they don't know how, then it doesn't lead them to a healthy place where they could have healthy relating. And so it's not that anybody's to blame, other than we just didn't know, and we're still learning. And I said that, and I said, we're still learning. And if more parents who are going through divorce would talk to their kids like that, I think we'd have a lot better situation. But instead, what happens is one parent gets really fearful that the other one's going to take the children away. And so then they start pitting each other against each other. But if there could be more education out there about what to say to children, and this is what I learned from my own trauma patterns, if we could just be vulnerable and say, we're going through trauma and we don't know how to resolve this. We don't have the skills. Just like you teach people all the time different skills, you're their tutor. Who tutors us on relationships?
Yeah, it's one of those, one of those things that is often missing in the school curriculum, teaching kids life skills like how to handle relationships, how to handle trauma. With that missing, it does cause a great big gap in life and can lead to situations that are quite hard to handle. It can affect a whole life. Absolutely, I agree.
And I think, it's a great point that you make. when I think about what they could talk about, and by the way, there's an author there's a therapist that I love. He's a coach now, Jason Gaddis. I'll give him a shout out here because he has a relationship school, and one of the things he talks about is they don't teach, just like you said, they don't teach relationships in school. And so his mission is to help people learn about relationships, and eventually he does want to go into schools and teach about relationships. But one of the things I really think that they could teach is just to make some general conceptual awareness, like I'm saying here, is you don't have to give kids all the skills. You just have to say to them, look, if any of you here have gone through anything, where parents get divorced or whatever, or, these things happen, it's usually because people have different trauma patterns or things that they were unable to resolve. And so rather than, looking at it like somebody's to blame, look at it as like they have it's like mental health awareness. They had some issues that they hadn't learned how to deal with because nobody teaches about it. And so unfortunately, it can impact you, but just the main thing to learn is to keep sort of an open mind or neutrality about it, so that you can learn about it and be compassionate about it, and kind of be a force of not change, but just of love. I mean, to get back to the vibration of love, we can't be there if we're down in judgment, right? We can't just for the children to just be the children instead of being. But it's hard. There's so many parts to it,
Let me ask you, because obviously you went through a rebuilding journey before you would be able to receive that the lessons that you're learning on and you're teaching on how to train the brain to understand and accept love.
Yes.
So how did it lead from quite a lot of trauma that you've been through, a huge amount, to the point where you're now thinking about the love language? How did that work?
Well, it took a lot of failure. It took a lot of things not working out in my life that I really felt like, here I am, this person. I recognize that, I'm a good person. I feel like I have average intelligence. I'm just not understanding why my puzzle piece is not fitting in. But I'm also, I dove into all kinds of things like spiritual stuff. I wanted to learn, more about what empaths are, and I wanted to learn more about psychic energy and intuitive energy. And I got certified in hypnosis, and, as I mentioned earlier, learned all these different clearing techniques and things. But the one missing ingredient was that these conflicting parts and conflicting energies and have so much to do with what's going on and how we perceive ourselves and present ourselves out in the world and are able to move forward. So even though I could do a little relieving thing on my temporary stress or pain, my identity had shifted. So how I felt like I identified who I was out in the world compared to other people, that didn't feel good. And then I realized, wait a minute, maybe I went through all of this so that I could help other people with this. Because if you look around, what are we having problems with in the world right now? We're having a lot of problems with people identifying themselves or comparing themselves to other people on social media. Kids these days, this, they're going through depression, they're going through PTSD and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Because they're looking at social media and seeing all these people that are doing really well, supposedly, and they have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, but they're sort of looking, it's changing their brain chemistry, and they're using it, a part of them is using that as like self-punishment to compare themselves and say, well, I'm not as good as this person. Look, that person's got 1,000 likes on their thing and I only got 2, that must mean that I'm not as good as them. It's comparison,
Yeah.
comparison. So, I'm a recovering comparison, person myself, because of I think the more trauma you have, the more you're susceptible to comparing yourself to others.
Yes, absolutely.
That's one really big thing. It's when you've had some tough experiences, you tend to look at it through a lens like, why is everybody else's life better than mine? Why are they thriving and I'm not thriving?
And you think, I must have deserved what happened to me, because
Yes.
It's not happening to them. So therefore, it must be something I did, which is completely the wrong thing.
Yes.
It's nothing to do with it. I know.
Yeah, and I've been on forums and chat rooms where I hear, especially young people, saying things like they get in bad relationships because when they get in a relationship with somebody that treats them well, then it pushes all their buttons about how they feel about themselves. So if they grew up with trauma, they have self-hatred, they're not feeling good about themselves, then they get in a relationship with somebody that treats them well, and it blows their picture. They can't handle it.
Yes.
They can't handle somebody treating them well because they don't know what to do. And because there's this pressure now it's almost like performance anxiety. Like, I have to be this good person to keep up with somebody that's treating me nice, when it shouldn't be like that at all, right? I mean,
no, I've done just that one.
It should be a celebration, but I can say when I was going through my own trauma ladder and experiences that I did that too. But in fact, I want to take you back to Minnesota, because when I was there, here I was, a chiropractor, went from somebody that's supposed to have a position of status in the world, right? I'm a doctor, I'm a chiropractor, and then all of a sudden, I lose my dad, I go through divorce, and I just start going down the ladder. I'm okay financially at first, but then my self-esteem starts going down the ladder as the lessons of life just keep hitting me harder and harder. And so when I was out there after the mold thing, I was, doing shared space agreements, living with people in their homes. And at one point I ran out of money, and somebody else had brought moldy couches into where I was living, and it affected my brain again. And I didn't know what to do, except I knew I was so anxious. I knew I had to move out. Like, I got to move out of here. I got to move. I felt, like if you've ever seen somebody that's really in anxiety, it was kind of like, I remember there one night going like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. And so fortunately, all my stuff was in storage, by the way. So I really didn't have a lot of stuff. Whatever I had, a bed, a desk, the computer came with me, and the rest I just left there. I just left it, and I found somebody who was a friend of a friend that had a little apartment thing in their guest house, and that they said that they would give me some refuge for a while. So I was literally homeless. I mean, I really didn't have my own place. And so one day I woke up crying. I was in my bedroom. I was just beside myself. I was in tears over it. And I just couldn't believe how low my life had gotten, to the point where I didn't feel like there was anybody there that was to help me. My family was still a little bit estranged or distant from me. I think they loved me, but we weren't connected. And so I didn't have those feelings. How some people get really low and they have those feelings like they just want to leave, like they just don't, they get suicidal, or they just don't want to be here anymore. I was really sad because that's not how I felt. I didn't feel like I wanted to leave. I felt like I was being forced to have that feeling.
Wow. Interesting.
I felt like, why are all these things happening to me? Like, I want to be somebody who's happy in the world. I want to be somebody that's doing good in the world. And I have skills, but yet here I am like at my lowest point, like I can't do anything. So at that moment, I remember what somebody told me. It was actually a Kabbalah instructor. And if you don't know anything about Kabbalah, it's like the spiritual form of Judaism. And I remember that one of the lessons they shared is when people are in pain, they're so focused on their own pain that it almost becomes selfish. And I thought, that's bullshit. I'm not selfish. I'm going to prove it. So I was a collector of heart rocks. I still am. I love to collect these heart-shaped rocks. And everywhere I would go, I would collect these rocks. And it's one of the lessons that I teach, that we can always find what we're looking for, because the reticular activating part of our brainstem actually is wired that way. So if you get a shiny red car and it's whatever, some Ford car, and then you start seeing it out on the road, hey, there's another one just like mine. There's another one just like mine. It's because that part of your brain, the reticular activating system, is making aware of it. It's a filter. So that ties in with the whole law of attraction thing. So anyway, I was probably beating myself up for thinking that I'm a terrible law of attractor because I used to be good at this, and now look at where my life is. I keep attracting this mold wherever I go, and I couldn't get away from mold. It would follow me. So I had a bag of heart rocks in my car. I still had my car. So I had a bag of heart rocks, and I just remember, I had a dream. I forgot to tell you that. I had a dream one night that I should be helping homeless people. And the dream was, because I was in sales, that I would teach them how to be better salespeople. That was the dream. And because when you drive by and you see them they're holding up those signs. They're holding up little signs going, homeless, feed me. And I'm going, no, they're doing it wrong. They should be telling some kind of story or something, and people, they're just trying to play on the sympathy part of it. So I had a dream about that. And then when I was at my lowest point that morning, I went out to my car, got my thing of heart rocks. I got a marker and they had some cardboard boxes in the garage. I took some cardboard boxes and I wrote some things on them. And I drove out to where the homeless people stand on the side of the road when they're asking for things. And I parked my car in a parking lot and I walked over. I had my bag of heart rocks, and I had put, that's the other thing that I did. I had put, the little eraser stuff, like for ink that you get, the whiteout stuff. I got a little bottle of that, and I put a white heart on the rocks, and I put love in there. So I put the heart, and then I put love. And then I put that on all the rocks and brought my bag out there, had my little cardboard, and I went up to the first homeless person, and I said, hi, my name is Ed, and I've seen that you guys are trying to raise some money over here. And the first homeless person, she said, yeah. And I said, I was thinking of an idea to help you guys, but I just, can you tell me first, so you're homeless, where do you stay at night then? And she said, well, actually, I stay in somebody's garage. And he said, okay, so that's good. You have a place to stay. I said, I'm kind of in the same situation. I have a little place to stay too. I said, but I see you guys, out here, but I had an idea that might help you make more money. And she said, what's that? And I said, well, first of all, what are you going to use the money for? And she said, well, I don't take drugs anymore. I'm trying not to take drugs anymore.
Okay.
And I said, okay, well, that's good that you're trying. That's good. Are you in a program or anything? And she said, no, not really. And I said, well, do you think you could use the money for some help? And she said, maybe. And I said, okay, well, let's just try this. And then if you could use some of the money to get help, I think that would be good, because, you deserve to have, what you're looking for. So she said, I don't know. And she walked away. She just felt threatened by me, being there and asking her questions, which I understand. So she left and I was there by myself. So I had my cardboard. And so I wrote on my cardboard, heart rocks for the homeless. And I got my heart rocks, and I started, just standing there with my sign and holding up a rock. And people would come up and they'd roll down their windows and they'd go, "What is that?" And I'd say, "Oh, this is a heart rock for the homeless. We're giving out these heart rocks to represent love. And you don't have to donate if you don't want to, but if you do, we appreciate any donations." And people would give me money and they'd say, "Keep the rock, here's $1, or keep the rock, here's $5.
Wow.
2 hours, I made $70. And I'll never forget that, because it really lifted my spirits up. And I didn't do anything about it then, but right now I actually have a nonprofit called the Healthy Human Project, and I would like to get my Heart Rock project off the ground. So,
sorry, you go ahead. I just got really excited by the idea.
Yeah. So that was an example of how I got out of my trauma pattern, because I realized that I was in so much pain that I needed to do something for somebody else to get out of my own pain. I needed to give in order to get out of my own pain, because pain can be so self-absorbed. We're like, me, I'm in pain. Look at how bad I feel. My life is shit. My life is in the gutter. My life is, all those thoughts that we have when trauma affects us. And there's people that have probably had a lot worse trauma than me. People who have been prisoners of war and been tortured. People who have had severe child abuse or rape victims, or spousal abuse, or any of those things, physical trauma. But I had a lot of emotional trauma. Mine was emotional trauma. And because mine was emotional trauma, I was harder on myself because of that. Because I compared myself to those people that had physical trauma. And I said, "Ed, they've been through so many other experiences. You haven't been through that. How can you do that?" I wasn't validating myself.
Right. Before we go to a break, I just want to ask you this question, and you can answer it after the break. Is that the reason why you now work on how to train the brain to be in love? Hi, this is Jacqui, and you've been listening to one of my friends tell their stories today. I invite my friends to tell their stories to help you heal. If you do have any trauma or any difficulties that you think we could help you with, please visit my website, jacquiandfriends.com, and leave a message or contact me, and I'll be happy to connect you with either today's friend or anyone else who you've listened to or watched who you think might be able to help you further. Or if you just want to talk to me, that's great too. Right, Dr. Ed, we're into our final quadrant. So now I know that everybody wants to know about your coaching, how to train the brain to be in love. We'd all like a bit of that, wouldn't we?
Yes. So one of the favorite things I like to talk about now is the saying that's out there that I love you, but I'm not in love with you. It's a popular saying, right?
Yep.
People say that mostly as a form of escapism, and they don't even know it. They don't even know. Maybe some people are aware that they're using it as an escape tactic. But when they say that, or if anybody has ever said that to any of you listening out there, that is a form of escapism. It's a way of avoiding confrontation. But it leads the other person to believe that they don't matter, or that they're not really loved, or that their love never mattered at all because all of a sudden somebody stops loving them. And we live in a world right now, and I feel bad for the younger generations where there's a lot of this, like what they call ghosting, or people just blowing people off and things like that. There was a great conversation about that on one of the pages. We were talking about that because there's a difference between leaving somebody who's abusive to you and cutting them off because they're abusive to you, and the patterns just aren't changing, versus what's happening in the dating realm of, somebody goes out with somebody for a couple times and then they just never hear from them again or whatever. Or they have sex with them and then they're gone, and that's it. So why is that happening? Well, one of the reasons that it's happening is because of the identities have shifted for people right now. They're identifying more with trauma patterns. They're identifying more with not really getting in touch with what's hurting them inside. So therefore, they are not forming good bonds with other people. And as Stan Tatkin talks about in his book, Wired for Love, we need to learn how to co-regulate more. We need to learn how to help each other communicate more. And it all starts with just being aware of the possibility that we might have had some sort of micro-trauma that affected us. In fact, in one of the readings that I came across, there was an example of somebody when they were little. The author was talking about when he was little, he had a lemon peel thrown at him by his sister or something, like in anger, like, oh yeah, and threw a lemon peel. And it hit him in the forehead, and he was like, oh my God. And he said, that's not the same trauma that you might think is the other kinds of trauma that we typically talk about. But for him, in his brain, in his mind, it activated some feeling that he wasn't good enough, some feeling that he was bad, some feeling that, so imagine that got magnified out there 10 times, 100 times, where he's telling himself that he's not good enough because he got a lemon thrown at him. Or somebody goes and they speak on stage. I've talked to clients about this too, where they go and they're doing really well, and then they have this speech that they're giving, and then all of a sudden somebody laughs in the audience. And to their brain, it gets interpreted in this way, like, oh my God, they didn't like me. Maybe I shouldn't be a public speaker anymore. Mm-hmm. So with my business partner, Colette Stryker, she talks about this story because she worked with this gentleman, and he had this fear of public speaking after that. And so she went through the process, which I'm going to explain. And after that process, he was able to get over that fear and get back to talking again. So what happens in the brain is when we have trauma, we have segmentation happens. We believe that it happens to protect the brain. So imagine somebody, I'll take the extreme case that Gary Flint talked about in his books, where a prisoner of war comes back from being a prisoner. And they have all these distortions and all kinds of PTSD and all kinds of different voices in their head and things that are going on because of the trauma. And what he learned was that in order for them to survive, it's a survival mechanism now, they had to switch the wiring in their brain from all the pain that they were receiving from being tortured, had to somewhere along the way turn into a signal of, I like it. Now this sounds crazy, right? Mm. That how could a person like pain? Well, it happens all the time. People minimize it and they compartmentalize it, and then they get used to it, and then they become sort of friends with it so that they can get through it. It's part of a survival mechanism. But when the brain starts to train itself where that part becomes a dominant part, that it just sort of gets used to pain or likes pain in order to survive, guess what happens in the magnification in the reticular activating system in the brain? What does it look for? Remember my heart rock story?
Yes.
If you search for the heart rock, when I go out and I look through a bed of rocks, I see a heart-shaped rock because my brain is trained to search for it. But if I'm not going through the recovery or haven't resolved trauma in any area, but let's say relationships or pain specifically, then I'll look for it. I'll look for it in work. I'll look for it in relationships. My brain will be trained to look for pain and be on the lookout for it, to the point where it's not that I'm attracting it, but maybe I'm putting myself in situations where I ordinarily wouldn't, because I'm used to it. So let's say a person doesn't feel good about themselves and they say, hey, I can't date somebody that feels healthy because then that's going to be a lot of pressure on me to be healthy. So it's better for me to be with an unhealthy person because then at least I don't have to deal with my own stuff. So that's where the self-confrontation comes in. So I had to learn how to confront myself and my own pain. And when I learned some of these brain processes of reintegrating the parts, that's one of the things that we teach, is that the parts have to come back into alignment so that we can treat all of them together. They have to be on the same team. Because imagine if my left lung and my right lung were competing over air. Hey, you're getting too much air. Too bad. It's my air. No, it's your air. Imagine if those two organs were fighting, or the liver said, you know what? I want all the energy and I want all the blood flow. The heck with you, other organs. How would it survive? How would it survive? The body doesn't do that. But the brain, the mind creates what's happening in the brain. The mind. So one of my favorite questions by a physician that I heard did a lecture years ago at Larry Garrett's studio out in Chicago. And Larry, he's a famous hypnotist. He's a friend of mine. So Larry, if you ever see this, shout out to you, Larry. Thank you. But he asked the question, what is the mind? What is the mind? Is the mind one of the grooves and structures in the brain? Is it the front of the brain? Is it the temporal lobe? Is it the frontal lobe? Is it the cerebellum? Is it the cerebrum? Is it the brain stem? Is it the reticular activating system? Is that what the mind is? And he asked that question. The audience, they're kind of like, I don't know what to say here. But the consensus was, most people don't know. We don't know. It's this construct. It's something that sometimes feels like it's happening outside of ourselves, with all the information we take in. And so what we don't realize is that we can influence it. We have been influenced from outside sources all the time, by what we watch, what we take in, others that we see. We're subconscious followers in some ways. So to be really intentful and to form a belief that we can actually have an influence on our mind is pretty important. But through the work of Gary Flint and then Colette Stryker, and now I'm picking up on it and kind of running it through my own paths of what I want to do with it, we've learned that you can teach the brain to heal itself. You can teach the brain to get all the parts back working together on the same team again. You can teach it to give it instructions, learn. If you know hypnosis, you can teach it to do hypnosis on itself. If you know EFT, you can teach it to do EFT. So any treatment modalities out there, all you have to do is introduce the brain, the mind to the concept. Colette calls it the superconscious. She calls it the superconscious. Gary called it the subconscious. So he would talk to the subconscious. She started referencing the superconscious because she believed that the superconscious oversaw all those parts. So let me just bring it back. I know you're going to ask me another question. Let me just bring that back. So what does that got to do with love? So we have to get the brain and the mind coordinated. If those two are on the same team, now we can move up that emotional ladder that we were talking about, and that consciousness ladder in the beginning, get out of fear, get out of shame, get out of expectation, get out of identities that where we believe that we're not as good as other people out there, and we can start elevating ourselves up the ladder little bit by little bit, so that we get to the point where we accept ourselves, we have compassion for ourselves, we forgive ourselves. And actually, it's not in that order, because we really have to forgive ourselves first. We have to have compassion for ourselves to be able to forgive. So we have to have that ability to say, you know what, you were probably doing the best that you could in that time. And, I forgive you for not knowing, what to do at that time. And that forgiveness allows for the next level to start to come in, and for the next level to come in, until we incrementally run up to acceptance and then to love. And once we get to love, we vibrate at about 500 hertz, or 500 on the scale. And that brings us into a place where we can find solutions, and we can feel our own inner joy again. But we have to bring that inner joy to relationships. We can't get it from somebody. I can't get love from you. I can get experiences from another person, but I can't. So that's where people confuse like love and pleasure. They don't know the difference. Like they think, oh, okay, I have a partner and I'm getting sex. They love me. And then the next week that partner leaves. Why did they leave? Oh my gosh. What happened? Well, that's because we need to define that the brain was thinking that the two were the same. And we need to understand that it doesn't work that way for everybody, that not everybody sees those two things as the same. And love is being able to bring all the elements of compassion and acceptance and inner joy and inner peace together into a celebration where you can share that with each other.
Do you know what? I don't know about you guys, but I could listen to this for a whole lot longer. Right? Ed, could you tell everybody where they could get hold of you if they want to hear more, and how they could get hold of you in general? Yeah,
well, we're working on the website right now. So I would say Instagram is a kind of a fun place to connect because it's pretty easy. So you can go to the healthy hashtag, the Healthy Humans Project. It's got an S on it. So the Healthy Humans Project. That's where you find me there. And then I also have some Facebook pages. I have a Facebook group called the Healthy Humans on the Go. And there, it's a small group that I've put together where we're just getting like-minded people who want to talk about these things, resolve their micro traumas or macro traumas so that they can move ahead and with their gifts in the world and be in relationships and bring their love and their joy and their heart rocks to the world.
Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. I'm certainly a big fan, and you know that. Now we're going to put you under the spotlight a little bit, I think. And it's Ask Dr. Ed time.
Oh, all right. I thought that's what we were doing.
Chicken or beef, Dr. Ed?
Chicken. I'm a big believer in eat right for your blood type, and I'm an A positive, so I would choose chicken over beef.
Okay. Shorts or long trousers?
Shorts. Shorts are more comfortable.
Okay.
I'm in Arizona, so it's apropos.
Big boots or trainers?
Big boots, or what's the other one?
Or trainers.
What are the trainers?
Oh, sorry, language translation there. Sneakers. Is it sneakers?
Oh, like tennis shoes. Tennis shoes. Or running shoes, sometimes they call them.
And the last one, very important on a night out. Are you a whiskey or a gin and tonic man? Or a beer even?
Easy. I don't drink, so that's easy.
Well, there you go.
But I do take homeopathics that have a little bit of alcohol in them, so I don't know if that counts.
Thank you so much for a completely informative episode.
And thank you, Jacqui. This was fun.
I enjoyed it. And yes. I will definitely be watching this through again and again because you've really come up with some interesting points. But I want you to...
Yeah, if you think of any other questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to...
One more... Give me one more piece of advice for our listeners in one sentence.
More piece of advice. Okay. Let me get grounded with this. Remember that how we identify with ourselves is what we magnetize out in the world. And so it's important to really, if you're feeling any feelings that you want to change, remember you can change them. You can rewire your brain. You can rewire for love. And when you rewire for your own internal love, you'll be able to share that love. You'll be able to find those who are like-minded and want to share love with you and are heart-centered. So if you're single, it helps you find the love of your life. If you're in business, it helps you find the endeavor that you really love and that you're passionate about. And you find your inner love frequency or vibration by rewiring your brain. You find what you're looking for.
Thank you. And now this has been Survival Stories with Jacqui and my friend, Dr. Ed. See you again next time.
Thank you.
And there we have it, another empowering episode of Survival Stories. If you had something today that resonated with you, please reach out at jacquiandfriends.com and download our free PDF. Don't forget to head over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review and rating. And whilst you're online, why not join our community of warriors on Facebook at Survival with Jacqui. Look forward to seeing you there.